Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
Today we're going to be talking about The Vast of Night, the Andrew Patterson film from 2019. Real quick, email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org about things you want to hear us talk about, whatever you like. We love hearing from you. And this episode is a little bit special, right? This is different than anything we've done before.
Yeah, basically we were asked to lead a conversation about the Amazon film Vast of Night, which is great. It's like a period 1958 sci-fi film. It's a very Spielberg-y meets Linkletter. It's just a small movie that they did a really good job on. And the Fulcrum Arts reached out to you.
Yeah, Robert Crouch from Fulcrum Arts, yes.
Yeah, so their deal is art and technology. So they got like all the sound people. Sound plays a very big part in this film. So they got all the people who worked on the sound for the film together. And we had a conversation with them after watching the film together in one of those Amazon party rooms.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it was actually surprisingly fun. I had never done that before. And it was fun. Like a lot of people came out and checked it out. And we decided to release the conversation as an episode.
Yeah, and I feel like we could easily have done an entire episode, just you and I, on this movie. There's so much. And going into it, when you and I were just texting back and forth about things that we were not going to be covering in our conversation with part of the team that made this film. But I kind of thought it would be cool to just release this episode without a long introduction of us talking about the film and just get straight to that.
Yeah. I mean, like, ultimately, I loved it. I think you loved it.
Yeah.
It was an inexpensive movie to make. I mean, $1 million is cheap for a movie. And it's just a very successful movie.
Absolutely. The people in the conversation are actually going to introduce themselves, but Johnny Marshall Crow and Erik Duemig will be explaining their parts on the film. And even though they're the sound crew, I was really into that they were all very eager to talk to all things about this movie. I was a little bit nervous about, I didn't want to talk to, say, the boom operator and go like, so the actors, blah, blah, blah. But that's actually the stuff that they brought up themselves, which was really fascinating.
Yeah, it seems like it was a very, shot in Texas, and Texas has this very scrappy film community. It's like, the way they describe it is like you have these ultra talented people who just drive Ubers when they have to, and then like the fire department getting called out, they'll just go work on a movie, and they're not above helping each other out. Like, there was one thing they talked about where they were just had to cover a street in gravel, and like everybody jumped in. And I think that's just a type of filmmaking I think is just very cool, and you can feel it on the screen.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so before we get right to that conversation, I want to again thank Robert Crouch and everybody at Fulcrum Arts for putting this together. Enjoy. I was wondering if I could ask Crow, Erik, and Johnny, as you introduce yourself, of course, maybe if you could tell us a bit about what your role in filmmaking means. So, what you normally do and what that is exactly, because maybe not everyone knows what those positions on a film set or in film post-production actually is.
Sure. So I guess I'll go ahead and start out. I'm the sound mixer of the movie, the production sound mixer, which means that I was the one mixing the sound of the dialogue on set during the time that we were filming the movie. So I go on set with like a portable recording studio, basically on a cart, and I press all the buttons that allows me to record and mix the sounds of the movie, mainly the dialogue, because that's going to be the stuff that mostly from the onset stuff gets used in the final product. A lot of the sound effects and other sounds in the movie often get replaced or augmented in post-production, which is where Johnny comes in. But me and Crow, my twin Crow, worked on the production side, so I'll let them introduce themselves. But that's kind of my role.
Yeah, and I'm Crow. I'm Erik's twin. I was the boom operator on the film. And so the boom operator is the person who holds the long pole with the microphone on the end over the actors so that we can hear them. In this movie, they had me holding that pole for very long periods of time. Sometimes 15 minutes straight in a row. There's long stories. Mabel tells a long story. Faye has like a long scene at the switchboard. But yeah, so I'm doing that. And then also our team for the most part on this show only consisted of me and Erik. And so sometimes on production, the sound department will have a third called a sound utility. And we had that for a couple of the days. We had a guy named Patrick Wiley come out for one day and a guy named Carlo Montano come out for another day. And those were mostly in the scenes in the basketball court for like the big 360 shot and things like that were a little bit more involved and required multiple wires being deployed. Wires meaning like we put mobile transmitters on people and have like little tiny mics called lavalier mics on them. And so on days like that, we had a third. But for the most part, it was mostly just me and Erik doing all of that. All the cart setup and running things to the monitors, and then also miking actors, holding the pole of the actors, like everything. And then Johnny.
I'm Johnny Marshall. I am a sound designer, supervising sound editor, and re-recording mixer based out of Dallas. I have a home studio where I am right now, where we actually mixed this film and did the last stage of sound editorial. I have a partner that I work on a lot of films with down in Austin named David Rosenblatt. He was the co-sound designer on this film. And when I was first approached on this film, I was in the middle of a couple of other films. And so, I told them the only way that I could actually be involved would be to bring in David on this, let him do the initial sound editorial, then send it all back to me for supervising and do the additional sound design and the final mix. And so we mixed in 5-1 here in this room. The whole film was done in home studios. It was, this is a lower budget indie film. I like to go to a bigger stage if there's the budget for it to do the final mix on a large stage. This one, however, required that we do everything. David has a home studio in Austin. I have my home studio here. And together we worked to make all this happen. Post sound, in a nutshell, is everything that's not done actually out in the field during filming. So all the audio that's recorded out in the field is sent to us, and we edit all the audio that's taken from production sound, and then add Foley work, sound effects, sound design, bring in music and final mix and kind of put it all together. So that's what we do in the post audio world, which is nice because I live in Texas and I don't like to be outside unless I'm by a pool when it's 100 degrees outside. So
yeah, thankfully
we had the privilege of it being nighttime for
nights. Yeah,
true.
But it was in August, so if it was still hot. But
it was night, so that goes 3 weeks of nights, so 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. every day.
So I'm very curious, just right off the top, when you approached all of you to do this movie, it's obviously has such a very unique voice, and the sound has so much to do feeding into that unique voice. How was that brought up when this project was brought to you? Is it immediately, hey, I want to do something that's going to be like a challenge, or you'll really be able to stretch your creativity in this project? How was it introduced to you?
I'll start first. When Andrew approached me, the main thing that he was concerned with, obviously every film has its unique challenges, sonically, but the main thing he was concerned with was, besides all of the normal nuts and bolts of audio posts, with dialogue editing and ambiances and whatnot and Foley work, is coming up with a sound that was going to be the alien's voice, so to speak, and how we manipulate that sound through the course of the film. So that's the biggest thing that he approached me with, is his concern of this is going to be a big sound design important part of the film to give it, a certain character. So that was going to be the main challenge.
And how do you know when you've got that sound right? Is it like you scare children with it, or like?
You never know until all of a sudden it just feels right. I mean, we went through a lot to create that sound, and it varies all through the film. David had come up with some initial design of the sound, and it had a lot of textures in it. It was a very complex sound that had, guitar stuff, forwards and backwards and granular synth stuff, and, textures and beds and whatnot, and some voices and just a lot of different textures in it. And when it came to me, and it was the first time for Andrew to actually sit in the studio and really hear what all these things were, he wasn't really happy with it. It wasn't working for him. And so what we did was went back to all the initial elements that David had put together and started going through, okay, here's some backwards voices and some other, here's some things that aren't working. And well, here's a texture that's working. This feels good. Here's a weird guitar thing that doesn't really sound like guitar, but it's, so we took a bunch of these elements and created into this kind of organic loop of different sounds. And even that, after we had worked through that, that still didn't really get what Andrew had wanted. He had expressed that he wanted some natural sounds of, maybe insects or some kind of live creature thing, but we didn't want it to be, something that anybody would recognize or feel that they knew what it was. And so, when we're going through libraries and picking sounds, you can go down the rabbit hole. For anybody that has ever done audio editing and it's like somebody says, well, how about a wood door slam? And you go, okay, well, let's listen to 400 of them and see which one you like. So it's a deep rabbit hole you can go down. So then Andrew said, he goes, I really need something that kind of sounds, and he made this sound with his voice. He's kind of all this weird sound coming out of his voice. And I said, okay, wait, grab a mic, sample that. Then we take that and I put it in and, sorry, Siri. Then go. It's like she's having trouble.
There's your alien voice right there.
I know, exactly. Yeah. But took Andrew's imitation of something extraterrestrial and, did a lot of work pitch-wise to it, a lot of modulation to it, really morphed it into a texture that could be added to all the other layers that we had, that all of a sudden gave it life. We didn't know what kind of life it was. And then it started to work. Then that was at the point where we felt like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. And then we need to figure out when to use what through the course of the film, because it's not always going to be the insecty Andrew thing being prominent and maybe some of the other textures moving. And then after that, it was make all the different sounds, because it's always playing through something different. It's playing on the switchboard, it's playing on the radio, it's playing. Modify those sounds to match, where all these different sound sources would be. So that's kind of a long story, but sorry.
I love
but
hearing
anyway,
you describe.
That's how we got there.
I love hearing you describe all the layers, because I found my experience of listening to the sounds during the movie was a lot like hearing those old recordings of EVP, of ghost voices on old reel-to-reel, where you're like listening in and you hear something, but maybe you're not. And you try to parse out the different layers of something that may be nothing. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about these organic and inorganic layers that come together in this piece.
Cool.
Yeah. So how about you guys, Crow and Erik, as far as being introduced to the project and how it was framed for the work that you had ahead of you?
The funny thing is, so Crow and I were brought on by one of the producers, Melissa Kirkendall, who at the time that we got asked to do this movie, she was a friend of ours that we'd worked with on one or two movie projects already at that point. And she was like, I want to bring you guys on to this. But she didn't really have a whole lot to tell us as far as like, we're bringing y'all on specifically because this is like a sound-centric movie. In fact, it kind of ended up being the other way around, where she sent us the script and Crow and I started telling all our friends, we're like, guys, we get to do a sound movie. Like, oh, this movie's actually about sound though. Like, right. I remember being like gearing up for the show and then subsequently being on the show and like bragging to my friends, like, oh man, I get to actually do a movie about sound. And like, there's all this vintage recording equipment in it and like an old switchboard, and the production designer's like asking me questions about it. And like, man, this rules. The whole thing's about sound. Everyone just tells stories in this movie. There's not even like really that much visual stuff going on. And
right. But it is kind of this cool, like sort of welcome to Night Vale sort of 1950s, like sci-fi vibe. But when we were first approached by it, yeah, like Erik was saying, like all Melissa told us was like, it's like a super low budget movie with kind of crappy rates for a first time filmmaker. And we were like, okay, sounds great. We'll do it, I guess. And then she sent us the script and we were like, oh, we really want to do this one. I didn't know it was going to be good. Like, it's awesome. Like, this movie rules.
And Mark and I were talking about like the budget of this film when we were watching it. And like, we noticed that this film and Glenn Danzig's Veronica had the same budget. And like the difference in effectiveness for the two films is quite dramatic. I mean, I'll just go ahead and shit on Danzig's vision, but it was terrible. And this film, like
yeah.
I mean, you wonder what did he do with the money? Did he just like blow it all in the strip clubs that he cast everyone out of, or what? Like, but this movie seems it made the dollar go very far.
Oh yeah, I think they spent their money very, very judiciously on this movie. You know, it helps that we're making this movie in like the 21st century. You know, that we can have these magic Argentinians who can make a spaceship on like no money come out of thin air. And
yeah, Rodrigo and Marcelo were really cool. They were on set like talking with us about how they were going to make the alien stuff, and mostly Crow and I were talking with them about like Brazilian pop music from the 80s.
Yeah.
But there was so much judicious use of budget on this movie. I mean, so many
cars were all free.
The cars were mostly free. Melissa got like most of the crew for cheap. Like,
and like a really good crew too. Like, these are like really good people who like do really good work. Most of them work on big shows all the time. It's not like these people were all just like the indie scene. Like they are, but like also Central Texas has this wealth of crew that does really good work. But you know, the volume in Texas is such that it's not enough to always employ these like really talented crew members on like big, good paying shows all the time. And so a lot of indie movies in Central Texas end up having these like pretty A++ crews for like little to no money, you know, like you can do these low budget movies and have a great key grip. You know, our key grip was awesome. Like throwing up the key grip and the gaffer, like throwing up lights on that water tower, like with no money, with like one condor.
Our poor gaffer literally like boom armed a moonlight for all of that, like walking stuff at the beginning of the movie with Sierra and Everett, like walking down the streets. Like you'll notice there's a light that moves with them, and
it's a paper lantern like, on the end of like a long metal rod.
Hold a boom pole with a moonlight on it, and you know, I mean, also I will say a big ups to the townspeople of Hillsboro and Whitney, Texas, too, because they came out of the woodwork to help this project. Right. They just were so stoked that we were filming a movie in their town that like no less than like 20 people came out and just like offered us stuff, whether it was
they filled that parking lot with old cars. They filled that whole gymnasium with people, like, and these were not like paid extras, y'all. Like these were like mostly just like the people who lived in Whitney who are like, they're filming a movie here. Cool. Let's go be in a movie in the stands at a high school game. Like they really did a good job. Like hats off to Melissa and Adam for like involving the town in this whole experience of shooting a movie. Like all of Whitney, this was like the biggest thing to happen in Whitney and Hillsboro in like years. So
Melissa comes from a really, really strong DIY work ethic and like used to own rock clubs up in Dallas, and like just has this really strong like community ethos that she kind of brings to her style of being a producer, which is, I will say, very abnormal as far as the movie producers that I usually work with. And so I really appreciate that about her specifically.
And is she the producer that you mentioned that was also the production designer?
No, that's Adam.
And Adam is actually in the movie. He's the husband in the first car that Faye and Everett talk to when they're interviewing people.
Speaking of interviewing, can you guys talk about the dialogue a little bit? Like, are they riffing? Is it workshopped? What? How?
All
Why?
It's scripted.
It's
all
all
scripted. 100% of that dialogue is like, it was written out exactly how you hear it on screen. And like, they just workshopped it a lot and got it down to this script that was the shooting script that we worked on. And yeah, they really didn't riff a lot. Like that snappy dialogue, that whole style was very much on the page. So much so that actually, like, I kept a page of the sides and hung it on my wall for a really long time because I was just like, this is bonkers. Like, this script is bonkers. We had this great read on that initial push in that has that guy saying, it's like the TV moment where the guy is like, hey, you and the family going to the game tonight? And I kept that page mostly because there was this really funny read on it that like didn't actually make it into the movie, of this super goofy dude out in the car being like, hey, you and the family going out to the game tonight? And it was just like awesome. It was like so over the top. I was like, this guy rules.
Oh, good thing we're not playing them. Like he took it really over the top in some of the takes, and they used like a very like sort of restrained take, but that guy was bonkers. Yeah, that was day one too. That was the only daytime shot that we got in the whole movie. Like that was day one. We started at like 4 p.m. before sundown, but then every other day on the show was like, yeah, like Erik said, like 7p to 7h, like all night.
So obviously when you see the script, you see the verbiage, you see the dialogue. But at what point did you go from, I'm super into this very sound heavy project, to realizing you're going to be standing like this for 8 hours a day, like running down the street, and realizing it's going to be like labor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, thankfully, I didn't have to hold the pole for many of those long, like, sort of walking shots through the streets of Hillsborough.
It's like Aaron Sorkin, like,
yeah,
roided up. It's
yeah,
incredible.
they're very cool shots. I really do love them, but there was just no effective way to boom those shots because they're all low angle. You know, you can see the lights, you can see the sky, like you can see everything, and there's like, you know,
and Rob holding a moon
of headroom over them, you know, and also, you know, this paper lantern going over them. So we ended up using the lavs for a lot of those. It was more for like the long story moments that I had to hold the pole, because it was like, it was so ideal to record it, you know, it was just them sitting and it's in like a close-up like this. But, you know, the way we shot it 12 pages at a time. You know, we would shoot the entirety of, from the time Billy calls to the time that Billy is done talking to Everett, like all the way through the story, through the hang up, through the recall, through everything. All of that as like one long take just on Everett, or like, you know, one long take just on Sierra at the switchboard. And so those takes ended up being like 15 minutes long, you know, they're just like the whole story over. And we ran it like 5 or 6 times, you know, just like, it was brutal, but you know, we get through it.
Johnny, I totally switching gears here, but I'm very curious about, you know, of course, when you watch it visually, it's arresting as a period film. And to my eyes, they stuck to that very effectively. Mm-hmm. How much were you true to era when thinking about sound design? And maybe even, did you even like sculpt the sound to sound more vintage? Not when it's very obviously sort of coming out of a radio or a switchboard, but.
If you go back and listen to really old films, you realize how terrible they sound. Yes. So that's certainly not a desired direction to go. But we were very, very true to getting car sounds to sound like those, you know, cars from that period. Any kind of effect that would be period specific, we would be very true to. But as far as trying to make the sound like a film that was done back then, not really a direction that I thought we should go.
You guys have any insight on the decision to frame the film in television? Because like when you watch it, or rather listen to it, it feels more like a radio drama than anything else. And there's all like the clues to it. You know, there's like a, you know, the WOTW is like the reference to War of the Worlds and stuff. Were they trying to like go down the middle of that, or like what's the story?
I mean, I can't really speak to Andrew's thoughts on it specifically, but I mean, it does really kind of play on like the progression from radio into where the story takes place, where it's like TV is still relatively new to these folks, but it's so engrossing, you know, this like idea of like a Twilight Zone-y kind of sci-fi show. And that's kind of what we're watching. But I feel like the kind of sparing use of that, you know, of switching between this modern looking film and this sort of like blue gray sort of 50s television drama, and then also the black of like a radio, like saying just focus on the, you know, the sound, it gets a modern audience to think about how exciting a radio drama would be, you know? Like, I think I agree with you, Chad, that it does feel like a radio drama, but I think the integration of sort of the radio drama elements, the old TV elements, and the modern cinema elements helped to kind of guide a modern audience to this feeling of excitement around something as simple and sort of ancient to this day and age as a radio drama.
Well, and also I think, you know, different people brought different things. And I imagine some amount of this grew out of actually doing the project. Because if I remember correctly, when I was first talking to Andrew about it on set, a lot of his thoughts were about the Twilight Zone, right? Like, dude was just saying the Twilight Zone is awesome. I want it to be kind of like the Twilight Zone. That's what the Paradox Theater kind of idea is kind of nodding to very really. And I wonder if the writers of the film were really into radio drama and were drawing a lot from that space, or if that was something that then kind of came more into Andrew's purview by nature of like being around all this cool vintage equipment and having people gush about like, wow, radio is so cool. And like this style of storytelling just kind of like makes sense in this paradigm. You know, I don't really know.
Erik, before we started talking, you had mentioned something about drive-ins, but I kind of missed it. What were you bringing up then?
So what I was bringing up was that I don't exactly know the specifics of the original release schedule or like idea for this movie. I believe Amazon wanted to release this movie in more than just like a mild limited
nationwide
in theaters. They wanted a wide release in theaters. And then of course the pandemic hit this year and no one's going to movie theaters, right? And so they were able to pivot pretty quickly in several cities around the country that still have old drive-in movie theaters and play the film as a premiere, as a theatrical release at these drive-in movie theaters. And I got to go see it with Crow and their partner and some friends in Los Angeles while I was out there earlier on in the COVID times. And I think certain sections of the film, especially the part where they cut to full screen black for like 5 minutes and like really dive into like the radio drama thing, actually hearing it through my car's radio while I'm watching the film was a really special immersive experience for being able to watch this film, you know? So it ended up being this kind of happy accident of the situation of this year, the way that I got to experience the premiere of this movie, you know, for audiences outside of the film festival space.
Yeah, it's so nice that those relics are still around. Something that really struck me again about the sound in this movie is that something Chad and I talk about a lot when focusing on horror movies is we have this cutoff line where so many horror movies are now take place in the 80s, take place pre-mobile phone, because you don't have to go like, I'm out of bars or my battery's dead. If you're stuck in the forest, you're just in the forest if it's pre-mobile phone. And something that struck me about this movie is it being pre-mobile phone. This movie really shows how cumbersome communication can be. Everybody's running. The switchboard operator is so cumbersome. The radio station is like one person and the power goes out. The entire town might be in danger or something. There's no way to tell them without running down the street or stealing a bicycle or, and that's all about sound, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting approach, you know, to have the film set in that time period. I mean, it all played together to make the film work. The fact that communication was difficult, she's trying to get hold of different people on the phone, babysitter's now lost, and all of that just really played into what it was like before we had instant contact with anybody and everybody at a touch of a button. So I think that was a really important aspect of the film.
Yeah, and props to Sierra and Jake practicing all that vintage gear. Like, Sierra did such a good job with that switchboard, and Jake did such a good job with the reel-to-reels and the vinyl player and everything. Like, he ran that, in those scenes at the radio station. He really runs that radio station like he does it every day, But like, no one uses that technology anymore. No one uses reels.
Their physicality is really credible, and the way they manipulate in their like fine motor acting is really cool. I'm watching Band of Brothers for like the 50th time through right now, and like that's one of the things that makes that show special is like the objects that they're using. Everybody really knows how to use. I notice it now so much when somebody's like doing something, and it's really bad with green screen. Like, it's very hard to sell your movements with green screen. So to have like physical boxes and stuff there is such a joy to watch as a film viewer.
Totally, yeah. And a lot of that stuff from that era was really heavy, It's like we forget now that everything's made of plastic and aluminum, In the 50s, like, that recorder was like heavy. It's made of metal. Those cars are just steel cars. Like, they're big, They're big, heavy things. Everything is heavy. The reel-to-reel, everything. The switchboard, like, everything's huge and heavy and metal. And it lends that weight, when she's running around holding this recorder, it's like, that's going to tire you out.
Yeah.
As is running around with a toddler. Jeez, poor Sierra, just like running around with that huge kid. We had so many shots of just her running through the streets, just carrying this huge baby.
Since we have a question, this is going back a ways, but how long did you make the director ADR his alien clicking, Johnny?
That took probably about a minute and a half, probably. The sound came out of his mouth. I hooked up a mic. He did it. And I said, great. Now give me a few minutes. Now let me play with this. No, it took no time at all to do the alien stuff with Andrew.
Oh, that's great. I want to encourage people, if you have any more questions, please send them in.
This isn't really sound related, but like the setting of 1958, like I was thinking about 1958, and two factoids that I ran across that I thought were pretty interesting was that I guess there's like a film sound recorder that was invented in 1958, like the Niagara 3. And then the other one that was kind of interesting to me, being from Louisiana, is that this is the year that the Pope named a patron saint of television. Like, there was this saint named St. Clair who was bedridden and couldn't go to mass. So she was staring at the wall, and she claimed that she could see the mass on her wall. So I thought it was kind of an interesting, like, weird little 1958 thing. And then now that we're all on Zoom, I wonder if she could be like the patron saint of Zoom.
Right? Wow. Those are some pretty interesting factoids. If you'd asked me, like, can you come up with some interesting trivia from 1958? I don't think I could pull a single thing out of thin air to tell you about that year specifically. But that's
Nagra was made in 1953. Was built in 1958. Man, that guy had legs. That guy had legs. We're only on the Nagra 5 or 6 now.
Well, I would witness my first tornado in 1959, if that counts for anything.
Yes. I'm glad you brought up tornado. This is something else Mark and I were talking about. I just today finished this book called Sound Design and Science Fiction, which is really kind of a good, if you're into this shit, like, it's definitely something to read. And they talked a lot about like how the sound of wind is often used in science fiction movies, and it's a cue for like alien abductions. And then it also made me think of like, the vast of night is from Shakespeare's Tempest, and that's like a whole storm entryway. And I love how like the alien spaceship is referred to as a tornado, and how does that like naturalistic, supernatural thing influence sound? I mean, do you guys try to mimic that? Think about it. Is it something that comes up?
Well, I mean, we use so much wind in film. You know, it's not like you go to a sound effects library and grab, okay, here's some wind, okay, throw it there, yeah, that's perfect. You know, creating what you want to do emotionally using wind usually takes a lot of layers of wind that do different things and move through time. So it's interesting that you bring up the concept of wind, because every time a new library of wind comes out by some sound designer, I always buy it. Just it's like, wind, okay, yeah, I'll take it. Another library of wind, yeah, I'll take it. Because it's always these little bits of here and there that you pull to layer together to create that emotional feel of what you're looking for in certain scenes. I'm in the middle of, we're just now finishing David Lowery's The Green Knight for A24, and
So stoked.
do what? I'm sorry?
I'm so stoked. I'm glad you bring this up because I wanted to find some way to ask you about it.
Cool. Nice segue that I led myself into. You know, it was all shot, in Ireland and, that area. And there's a lot of wind going on in a lot of scenes, whether it's interior scenes, exterior scenes, whatnot. So there is just layers and layers of wind and all different kinds of wind that we're using throughout that movie. I don't know if there was anything specific you were wondering about that film, but that was a...
No, I just was curious. Just like, I don't want to take us off of That's Tonight too much.
Yeah, of course.
Something I read in the book that I read, it mentioned was that like a lot of sound design is most effective when you don't hear it or you don't notice it. So I imagine wind kind of falls into that category. Like it creates realism, but you're not looking to get blasted with it.
Yeah, you can definitely go the wrong direction when you're using lots of anything. What makes the depth sonically in a film is layers. But, sometimes the absence of that is just as effective as all of those layers. And so it's that play between a lot of things going on to very intimate points where there's not a lot of stuff going on and you're hearing every little tiny little detail. I totally agree with that concept of trying to approach knowing when there needs to be very delicate, quiet places, as well as places where all hell breaks loose and it goes crazy. And it's finding that balance is the key.
And I think I'd like to piggyback off that idea of like quiet places with regard to this movie, especially, you have a situation in this movie where you have a small town that is crazy about its basketball team, and literally everyone's in the town is at this basketball game. And so it has this effect of making it seem like the whole town is just there for Faye and Everett, right? Like it's their little town. It's just them and this rando couple from Culp Canyon, and that's about it for like most of the movie. And they're walking through all these spaces, these empty streets, empty back areas. You end up going on a long shot through the whole town where you're just seeing no people. Like it's just the town until you get to the basketball game. There's a ton of people, and then you leave the basketball game and immediately again you're like cold darkness, like no people, country living, like kind of area. And I think especially for people in urban environments right now, I think there's something kind of eerie just in that sense of space that gets created, this open darkness. There's a lot of these frames have these just kind of spots outside where the frame will just kind of spill to like a dark space, when they're outside, and it just kind of goes off the side into black. And then it's just like, it really creates this style, I think.
And to really quickly answer a question, I think I remember from the chat during the watch party about that shot specifically. That shot was in the script, and it was like described as a shot that travels from Faye to Everett through the entire town. Like we leave the switchboard, we go through the whole town, we go through the whole basketball game where everybody in the entire town is there, and then we go to WOTW. And the way they did that, which I think was the question from the thing, it was a camera on a gimbal. Like pretty much this whole movie was shot with a red camera on a gimbal, which is kind of like a poor man's Steadicam. And it's like something that just kind of like steadies the camera and as you're moving. But it was mostly done with a go-kart. We had a go-kart that the camera operator would like walk past Faye as she's smoking a cigarette out into the street and then sit down in this like go-kart like you would find at like Austin's Park and Pizza, you know, like at a go-kart track. And they would just drive straight through the town, down the whole thing, like over the grass and everything to the basketball court. And then they would get up and move. But it was actually 4 shots that were stitched together by Marcelo and Rodrigo. But it was 4 shots that then all of the first 3 shots kind of terminate in green screen. So it was like from Faye to, I think, like a part of the lawn right outside the school. And then it's from that part of the lawn into the basketball court. I think it's like there was a green screen like right inside the threshold of the school.
There's 2 before you get to the basketball court. There's 2 shots.
Right. Yeah, there's 2 shots. So it was like one kind of to the parking lot and then one from the parking lot into the school. And then there's one in the gymnasium doing the big 360. And we talk to the announcer and we look at the game and everything. And then it goes up the stairs into this window. And then the window has a green screen in it. And then the last one starts on a crane that was just outside the window, lowers down on the crane, and then they had to unhook the camera really quickly and then go. Like the guy was like sitting in the go-kart waiting to catch the camera and unhook the camera. Like the key grip had to unhook it from the crane, and Marcus had to just catch the gimbal, and then the driver of the go-kart just speeds off and we go to WOTW.
It is worth noting that this camera operator, Marcus, and the go-kart driver are like 20-year-olds.
Yeah, they're like 20.
Like adults would not do this.
Yeah, the 2 like executive producers that you see in the film, Caleb and Marcus, were also the first like the 2 like assistant camera operators who ended up also like mainly being like the camera operators of the whole show. And they were just like the 20-year-old friends of Andrew who had helped him, you know, like shoot some stuff for the Oklahoma City Thunder, that then they like got brought on to do this movie as like these camera operators that Andrew knew. And they're like 20. So they're just like throwing it together. I don't think either of them had ever been on like a film set before. Like they just did like videography work.
But they were totally willing to get on and off a go-kart without seatbelts and literally like go from being on a go-kart to running at full speed. Like,
yeah. Like they had no problem with running at full speed after these actors, with like walking for like half a mile through the city. Like they didn't care at all. They were just like, yeah, let's do it. We're this is cool. We get to be on a movie.
That's great. It totally works too.
Yeah.
No.
There were some other questions. I saw Robert posted them. It said, did they actually record their dialogue on the reel-to-reel? No, that reel-to-reel did work, but I don't think, and it did work insofar as it had a rewind function, and it could rewind and like roll the tape back and stuff, and like pressing play and pressing rewind like actually made the reels move, but there was nothing on the reel. So it's, you know, that was added in post. And then there was another, was Billy's side of the phone conversation available during production? No, it was not. We had Andrew reading that.
Billy was not on set. It was just Andrew reading against the actors. And on set, neither Andrew nor anybody had made the decision to go to screen black at that time. So we kept rolling on Everett's face that whole time that we were filming Billy's dialogue, and Crow's just like holding this pole over.
I was also kind of like ornery that day because like some of the setups for those, like not for like the really close push-ins, thank God, but for like some of the wider, very slow, sort of almost like trucking shots. I don't know if any of these actually made the film, but we had a few that were like kind of a wider shot of Everett at the studio. And Andrew had brought this thing that he, I guess, used in sports or videography like before, but it was like a long slider, but it was mechanized. And so you could like put a timer on it so that it's like, we want the camera to get from here to here in 13 minutes. It's like for time lapses and things like that. And it's just so freaking loud. Like you just hear it like as it's moving the camera, just like ever so slowly across this thing. I'm like, so I was like kind of ornery that day because I'm like holding this pole for like 14 minutes and all I can hear is just, and it's like, guys, they invented dollies and like sliders and all of these film things to be silent. Like this is not the tool for this that you guys want to do, but all right, I'll hold this pole for 14 minutes while we have this thing that's like killing our track behind it. Sure, why not? Let's do it.
To answer Aiden's question really quick, no, it was all on location. There were no design sets outside of like the switchboard studio was a design set, but it was designed in a tiny building in Whitney, Texas.
Yeah, the closest thing we had to like an actual set was the
radio station.
Was the radio station, because they did have that interior of the radio station in that tiny building, like behind WOTW, like you see in the like big long shot that travels across the city. But where we actually shot the vast majority of Everett's coverage was in a radio station set that they built in the locker room of the gymnasium. So it was in the same gymnasium place where we did the basketball. It was just in the locker room, but they just built these like fake walls and then put like the whole radio station set in there. So that's where we shot that. But yeah, like all of these were like real places, like the whole downtown area that had those string lights. Like that's really what amazed me the most was that set. It was like they basically took downtown Whitney and covered it in freaking dirt, and they didn't do it. They did it with shovels and rakes. Like they didn't have a track hoe. They didn't have anything to like move all this dirt over this entire like 2 blocks of road. They just had rakes, like, and a big pile of dirt, and the poor art hands just had to like shovel and rake sand over like a 1/4 mile of road. And it took like 4 hours, and we were actually down for like 2 hours. Like we finished all the other stuff on the schedule for that day, and then the next thing we needed to shoot was like this exterior of the town, and we weren't going to be able to shoot until the set was done. So like even Erik and I picked up a shovel for a little bit and like helped them spread frickin' sand all over the street, because it was like a modern asphalt street before that, but they wanted it to look like an old dirt road in the 50s.
A follow-up question: what's the reason for the dirt? Just to roughen up the town a bit?
Well, I think it was mostly just to make it look older, because downtown Whitney has like an asphalt paved road. It doesn't really feel very small town, and they had such a tiny budget. They really couldn't do very much to like make the signage look like big and flashy, and it's nighttime. Like you can't really even see it. All the lights are supposed to be off. And so thankfully the modern like shop fronts, which, in Central Texas, there's all these sorts of little like towns where most of the stuff is like boarded up in the main street because they have a Walmart now. So like, why are there businesses on Main Street? And so that was pretty easy to do. I mean, they did a few signs and things like that, but I feel like most of what gave it this sort of old 50s feel was the fact that there weren't yellow lines on the street. There weren't lanes. They're just walking in this street, and yes, cars use that street, but also feet use that street, bicycles use that street. And I think the visual cue of not having these sort of like lawfully mandated lines down the road gives you that feeling that it's like, this is a time before people all had cars. Like some people had cars. Faye didn't have a car. She ran everywhere. People rode bicycles. Like cars weren't as widespread. TV wasn't as widespread, It's amazing how much you can do with just a pile of dirt.
I have a quick question, and it has to do with Faye not having a car and running. I love that she has this, like, I'm going to get shit done, and she takes off running without realizing she could get a ride with someone. She doesn't have time for that. Like, she's just going to do it. the way in that first scene where we see her run is so endearing. Is that part of her character? Or is that how the actress actually runs? Because it almost feels like how a schoolgirl in high school in the 50s would run wearing those Oxford shoes. Like it's such an awkward, kind of genuine, kind of unself-conscious way of moving quickly from point A to point B. I'm just curious about how that was done.
I mean, really, that would have to be a question for Sierra, but like, because I'm not inside of her head. But honestly, I'd believe you either way. Like, if Sierra told me that she had workshopped this run, I would believe her. But also, I don't think she did. Like, I think she was just running. Like, I think she just had to run. And, you know, yeah, like you said, like, given the length of her skirt and the, you know, the Oxford shoes that she's wearing and like not wanting to get too sweaty, I guess. Like, I don't know. She just, you know, runs the way she runs. But maybe she thought about it. I can't say for sure though. I definitely know that she just, when she was carrying that big ass toddler, she just ran
a lot.
however she could without dropping that real human baby. Safely, but fast, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, they were not letting her go slow for the safety of that baby. It was like
no, they didn't. They were, thankfully the parents.
No babies were harmed in making
no babies.
No babies were harmed. 2 babies were used. 1 was selected, and it was the bigger baby.
Well, I have a question. Usually in Scary Thoughts, we end on something stupid, and it's usually a question of sorts. But alien spaceship over your small town in 1958. Do you want to get abducted? Yes or no?
You know, there's a lot to a small town that we didn't get to witness, you know? Like, the thing about it, like I said earlier, is that we got to hang out with Just, Faye, and Everett, and they're both pretty nice, cool people who are really interesting and, like, down to just, like, playfully record stuff with a reel-to-reel player. You know, I imagine if I were having to deal with all the other townspeople, maybe I might feel differently. I might feel like I really want to get taken up, go full Mabel Blanche, you know, but, you know,
I guess it depends on what age I am when you ask me this question. Like, am I Faye's age or am I 30? Like now, you know?
Right now, like we Back to the Future it back to that town, live there for a minute, decide if we love it or not.
I mean, that shit's pretty cool. I'm going to go with yeah. I'm going up on that shit.
Yeah, I'm going for yeah as well. It's like, I can't imagine anybody who has not fantasized to a certain degree about being taken up in a spaceship and hoping that it's like really, really awesome and not a bunch of weird probing stuff.
Yeah.
So
I
would have to
months to learn their language like a rival.
yeah. I'd have to opt for take my chance that it's going to be really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm going to be the contrarian and say I would stay on Earth because, like, as much as, like, being up in a cool spaceship would be, like, an experience no one's had before, and it's, like, it's very cool and very exciting, like, the unknown and stuff, like, there's still so much Earth to see. Like, yes, you live in this small town, but, like, there's China still. There's Japan. There's Europe. There's Africa. There's so much Earth. There's so much cool Earth. Like, just because your town sucks doesn't mean there's not so much Earth. Like, you don't need to go to space to get out of your town. You just need to go to, like, Tokyo. Like, it's chill. Like, just look.
True story.
All right. Well, on that note, you know, let's leave it on a really hopeful, Earth-centric note. I really want to thank everybody for coming out for this, you know, especially, of course, you know, Johnny, Erik, and Crow, Chad, and Mark. This has been a really wonderful, great thing to share and experience and to get some insight on this really beautifully made, well-crafted film that I think is, to me, feels like it's a classic film. It's just waiting for its status as a classic film, and we're just, you know, I can't wait for somebody in 50 years to do something like this, but it's going to be looking at us using Zoom, and people are going to be like, oh my God, that was so crazy how they had to use Zoom, to
Right.
using cell phones. But anyways, thank you all so much. And, take care, and everybody have a great and safe, Halloween week.
Yeah, y'all too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you to all the facilitators for putting this together. This was a really fun discussion, y'all. Great to watch this movie with everybody. To all the attendees, thank you guys for coming out. This was great.
Thank you guys.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.